it's part art and part science and part, just protection, IP protection for the farmers. It's pretty simple. What we do is we just go around to the seedlings or clones. Clones will only need cut from a single clone. So if you have multiple clones, it's all the same genetic material. But if we have seed, obviously there's variation from sister to sister or brother to brother. So we try to get a full scope of the genetic variation that's in the line. So we'll take four cuttings from each seed plant, and that will kind of tell us the different traits that are in that line. If we kind of relate it to dogs, so like a shepherd is a shepherd, and then within that shepherd you have Australian shepherd, you have German shepherd, you have all these different things. And in order for it to be considered a German shepherd, it has to have a pointy nose, it has to have pointy ears. Even if the two parents were both German shepherds, if that dog doesn't meet the specs of what a German shepherd is, it's not considered a German shepherd. And so what we're doing when we're tracking the seed line is we're tracking all the genetic variation that could happen from one sibling to another sibling, and giving the whole range of what the specs are for that seed line and what the farmer can expect and what's within spec. And if they were to pop a seed and it didn't fall within that spec, then it would not be called whitethorn rose. It would not be called mom's weed. It would have to be called something else because it doesn't meet those specs. So what we do is we basically just come through and we take these little samples of the plant. I'll take 4 from each one. I just put it down on this paper right here. And of course I misplaced my pen.
Of course, that always happens, right? You need one?
Yeah, if you've got one. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you to the rescue. Always.
So what we do is we'll mark the farm that it came from, Huckleberry Hill. We'll put a date on here, 9/12/2023. We will put the genetics. If we have the parents, we'll include the parents. If we only have the strain name that it is, we'll put that.
I forgot to tell you too, Ryan, I think that Paradise Punch crossed with Whitethorn Rose, we're naming that, that's the Paradise Pine.
Okay. Seed.
I got some triple burger from you guys.
It's not actually from us.
No?
No. I saw you with Dye Poppy. It's a different, I think it's a different farmer.
So once we've gathered all the material,
Unless they've renamed my other.
this paper is a special absorbent paper. It's made of cotton, so it'll wick up all the moisture back into the paper and allow the plant dressing to dry so that it can be mounted later. Basically, we just line these up. And give it a nice pressing. And then once I've gathered all of the samples, we'll put it into this thing. We'll tighten it down. It will compress even more. And then something that was about this big will be about this big, and we'll be able to store it in our herbarium, which is important because I think we have a 15 by 15 foot room that is stacked to the ceiling right now with plant pressing. So whatever space we can save is always nice. Anybody have any questions about what we're doing? Go ahead.
So you get them in this room. Is there like a digital database, or is there actual genetic test that's being done and assigned to that?
Yeah, so there's 2 groups that we work with. One is an herbarium called Candor. That it only keeps the physical copies of that. And then we also work for a genomics company. So what we can do is we can DNA sequence that material. And that material, like the DNA will be the same from clone to clone. And we'll try to capture that same variety within the seed lines as well. Really what this is like a starting point for us to reference. So in 2025, if Cresco decides that they want to call something Whitethorn Rose, and Johnny's like, no, the Whitethorn Rose is mine, I made up with it. We have a timestamp that says 2023. We can go back and we can show that Johnny was proof of ownership.
And in that, sorry, part 2 question.
Yep.
Have you had any success with protecting a plant? Has your company had success protecting a plant through the USPTO or any legal?
There are no cannabis cultivars that have a PVP at the moment. The only ones that have are hemp cultivars. Right. We are working with groups that design the PVPs. lawyer groups, like legal groups, to do that IP protection. It just hasn't happened in cannabis yet because it hasn't been federally legalized. So there's no the patent board won't recognize it.
Yeah.
PVP.
As a plant varietal patent.
So sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
So Canna Country 26, I know he's been doing this project with you guys for quite a few years in mapping it out in a pathway forward to patenting that cultivar, correct?
Yeah. So we've been really working really closely with Teddy for the last few years. If you guys have tried or seen the 26, it's a pretty special variety. Really dark color, really nice flavor, really unique compared to a lot of the things that's out there. And so they wanted to put some protection around that cultivar. So we are in the process of doing that right now. I think we're applying for one of the first patents in cannabis right now because they're looking at some licensing deals with some other organizations. But we are deep in that process. The more seasons and the more stuff that we collect, the better chance it gives the farmer to be able to get that protection. And so with Canna Country, we've gone out, we've taken multiple seasons of pressings, we've taken multiple crosses, and we've taken the original crosses and worked through that seed line. So we can say, without a doubt, these traits are related to this. They did the work to create this strain, and here's the proof that they did that.
Sorry.
I was gonna say real quick, just are you guys familiar with the way patents work with plants? Because it's a little different than like patenting like a truck part or something.
If you
Yeah,
can
please
explain.
enlighten us.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say just kind of the general gist of it is there's something called a utility patent, which has the most protection, right? And a utility patent is a very, very vague patent. There actually is a company that holds quite a few cannabis utility patents, which is really weird because you can't get plant varietal patents, but whatever, that's a whole nother subject. So, for example, a utility patent would be something that says any plant that falls under the category of having 10% THC or higher, 5% CBD or higher, and the dominant terpene is not myrcene, we're going to own anything. And what that allows that company to do, one of two things. Either they can then never ever act on that patent, but they hold it, so they're securing everybody's genetics, or if you're more cynical, they're now setting themselves up to basically take everybody's everything at some point that falls under that general category. They're extremely difficult to get. They're extremely expensive, and I can't remember the company that has it, but last I saw they had 9, I think, and they had another like 6 that were in the works, and this was quite a few years ago, so I kind of stopped looking into it because it got really kind of gnarly.
Is it GW?
I think
It's not GW. It's
Apothecary, Brett Bogue tried that path for a long time and knocking on all of our doors, threatening us. There are a few cats like that.
yeah, it's so that's the highest level, right? And it provides, like I said, a very broad overview of what the ownership is. As you start going down, it gets more specific for the varietal, but more vague for being able to act upon it. So you have your plant varietal patents. There's 3 of them. I'm missing one, and I think the plant varietal is the lowest one down, which basically would protect whitethorn rose and any clone of whitethorn rose, but not necessarily anything downstream. So if you were to get a clone of whitethorn rose and cross it with OG Kush, you could do that all day long. No big deal. Nobody has any right to come after you for that. However, if you have whitethorn rose and you start selling clones of whitethorn rose, even if you call it something else, if somebody comes across it and they're like, Johnny, I swear to God, I think this is whitethorn rose, and he goes, God, I think you're right. They can do that DNA testing, they can compare it with their herbarium sample, and they can say, this absolutely is whitethorn rose, and now they can issue a cease and desist because you're making money off of his work without giving him anything back.
Yep.
So it becomes really important with really special genetics. So part of the value of this, we can't get plant varietal patents yet, but what this does is this sets in stone a time frame and a time stamp and a physical sample that can be come back to later on. And this also provides something called prior art. So when we're talking about these utility patents, as things go forward, if somebody applies for a patent and they say anything that's over 10% THC and the dominant terpene is myrcene is mine, you have the chance to challenge that and say, actually, in my herbarium sample, we have 15,000 samples that fit that category, and they're dated from 2023 to 2017. So now we have defeated that patent. That company cannot act on that patent because there is something called prior art, which we have proof of. So
Yep.
companies like Leafworks are going about trying to get as many people as they can to do this so that we can protect against those overarching utility patents.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, the bigger companies are, you know, going to be in for a rude awakening when those when they try to enforce on those patents, because we have material dating back to 2015 that shows proof of ownership. It's got all those traits. So most of those lines that they're trying to talk about, like THC dominant, CBD dominant, terpene dominant, whatever it is, we already have samples of stuff that's been worked and proof of ownership of who does that. That's one of the things that makes Leafworks unique, is that we started the first cannabis herbarium, Candor, and so in conjunction with the DNA work, we also have a certified board that we can reference with the DNA sequencing, and so we have a timestamp, we have the DNA sequencing. It's really easy to prove this is proof of ownership. You had a question?
Yeah. Are there any like prerequisites to submission?
No. No.
So it could just be any. I grow some weed. I need it. I want to, you know, situate it, and then it just goes through no matter what.
So obviously, if it was a line that was created by somebody else,
Right.
you're not going to be able to take ownership for it.
Right.
We're kind of at a unique time with cannabis right now.
Because let's say if I get something and I cross it, I got the F2, and then, you know, I decide to cross it with something else. You feel me?
Yeah, so with plant varietal patents, oftentimes you have to show the work that you did with the line in
Right.
order to prove that you actually did something on it.
Exactly. So boom, right there.
So one generation may or may not quantify as enough work to be a plant variety patent. You may have had to take that line a few generations to get there, but yes, if you did the work and you can prove, hey, this was my starting material and this is where we got to, and you show the steps that you took to get there, then you can take ownership over
So
that.
I guess with that question is like, what's the minimal acceptance of work shown?
So, haha, it's kind of a weird time right now, right?
You feel me? Like,
We don't have a standardized database either federally or at the state level right now. So we actually, Leafworks was lucky enough that we got a grant from the DCC to start creating a database of vouchered plants of legacy genetics, so that we can say here's where the starting material was at. Yeah.
Sorry.
No. Yeah. One of the issues with that is proof of ownership and even identifying what a cultivar is, right? So somebody might have grown this and somebody might have grown this, and they were called the same thing by whoever they got the plant from, but they're not the same plant, right? And so one person thinks like, oh, Blue Dream, it always grows this way, it has this smell, and they're like, no, my Blue Dream grows this way. So there has to be some consensus over what those strains are. And so the cool thing about the project is it's a community-based research project. So we have experts from every area, all of the breeders, all of the legacy people who have been in those communities and know those strains, and we get community consensus around things. So we have 20 experts, and we're gonna go, is this Blue Dream, is this Blue Dream, is this Blue Dream? And then once we come to a group decision, then that's gonna get logged as Blue Dream. And then moving forward, anything that does not meet that description of Blue Dream won't be Blue Dream. So there may be strains that people try to come forward with and say like, oh, this is my proof of ownership. The cool thing about the way that we're doing it with the community is that we have input from all these different stakeholders that can say, no, this is not your work. We had it before this. This is not the strain that you're claiming it is, whatever it is. So it kind of takes the decision making out of Leafworks' hands and makes it a community-based decision, so that we can all come together and decide like, this is what this is and this is what we're cataloging.
that's bad. I fuck.
Yeah. Did you have a question?
I was just wondering, so what's to stop somebody that already has, maybe a stolen genetic from getting to you first,
Yeah.
and saying, oh yeah, here's my genetic, but
Yeah.
they had nothing to do with it, and then the person that did is like, no, that's mine. You're like, well, now prove it. I got here first.
So that is why I've been pushing the farmers. The earlier that we get it in, the sooner you have that reference point. And there will be people who are mischievous who want to try to do that. But that's why we're trying to do twofold of like, one, hit up the breeders and the people who produced it directly, and then second, the community based, so that people can say like, that's not your work.
Right.
This is this person's work, and we all know this, even if you want to claim that.
also can do things, this is kind of a side note, not necessarily with Leafworks, but you can also do things like if you have a clone that you know has controversy behind it, two dudes that are like, no, I did it, no, I did it, no, I like this is public sphere all the time, right? This weird infighting bullshit.
Yeah.
You can still do a genetic map on it and just be like, oh look, well, this was the cut that I got from this guy and here's what it looks like genetically. And so if it's clone only,
Right. Then it
right, it should be genetically all the way down the line exactly the same. When you're talking about seed things, and for me, like I take a slightly different track on this where it's like, look, if you want to do the work, it's great. But do the work and do something original and different. Don't cross gelato and OG. God, it's been done a million times. Don't cross gelato and wedding cake. Who cares anymore, right? Unless you really believe in that and that's your passion. And I'm like, no, I love gelato and wedding cake, and I'm going to do this because I want to create something that's like these two but has a special goal in mind.
Right.
Get to that goal and then do this and say, look, yes, here is the parentage. I crossed it here, I crossed it here, I crossed it here. So like what Ryan is saying, right? Getting each one as it goes down the line, the siblings of it. I had 12 keepers that I liked. Get them all done. And then from those, you start honing into maybe your 2 or 3 keepers that each are unique and different and have their own thing. And then you've put in the work and you have the proof all the way back that says, yeah, I started with gelato and wedding cake, but I got to this thing, which is unique and different.
Good. Thank you,
So
Wendy.
doing seeds. Do seeds. Seeds are fun, you guys.
Seeds.
Any other questions? Yeah,
Would using a notary at this process be beneficial?
that's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. To
I'll tell you
the
right
truth.
now, no, a public notary is not going to get involved in this.
I just mean
This-
some way to timestamp it officially, right? So,
Right.
because somewhere down the line, some crook is going to backdate it to try and claim his prize, right?
These are live samples, though. It's really hard to do that.
Okay.
These on a
Herbariums
blockchain anywhere?
start from live samples. usually.
Just to ask,
Yep.
is do you
But
tie
to
it into
his-
blockchain?
Did you create NFTs for each individual one? And honestly, because I mean, tokenization is where the world is going to right now.
Yeah,
And you got
And
art.
having an accessible database that would be able to, you know, archive every one of the cultivars that
Chain
were
of custody.
harvested, you know, for intellectual property protection, or just, you know, this is what we harvested, you know, because every flower needs to be tagged. So it has the metric tag on it. It has exactly what the cultivars, the terpene contents, and that's placed in a public database that anybody can access.
Yep, well, that's actually part of the DCC grant is getting all of these samples into an electronic database so that they can be referenced. We are not doing any blockchain technology on it at the moment. There are a couple groups that are kind of messing around with that. One of the issues with that is you have to have the physical copy to go with it.
Correct.
And the herbarium almost acts as that blockchain, and because once it's registered into there,
Yep.
there is that copy into the database. There is a place where it gets entered electronically. I don't know where that lives and what that's turning into, but yes, that like the idea will be there will be an electronic database and you'll be able to reference it and you'll be able to say like where it started, what farm it came from, the genetics, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's what I used to do.
Cool.
Database creation. That's why I ask.
Yeah, definitely.
As a physical nerd, just so you guys know, herbariums are all over the place and they're public usually.
Yep.
So like you can go in and actually, not for weed, but
Yeah.
you know, you can go in and look at samples of like seaweed or, you know, dahlias or sunflowers or zinnias or things like that. And they're very cool things to check out. It's really fun to actually go in and flip through, you know, old pressed samples of like, you know, cool plants from back in, you know, whenever that herbarium happened to have started. So it's fun to actually see this being done, and if you get a chance when you go back home, find an herbarium and go check it out. It's cool.
Absolutely.
And the fact that weed is now in herbariums, I'm like, what?
Yes.
This is crazy.
Yeah, Candor, the very first
Crazy.
cannabis herbarium, 2016. Candor is the name of the herbarium that we work with. If you guys want to check it out, I think there is a website with some information on there as well. Yeah.
Good question. So
Yeah.
the talking about like being able to protect a plant for the farmer, but also just thinking about what was in the commons before that everybody kind of has access
Yeah.
to without fear of getting sued or
Yeah,
something
open
coming out.
source basically is what
How
I
does
call that
this-
stuff.
How does this contribute to like the commons and
That's a big part of the DCC grant is the legacy genetics and defining what those open source genetics are that have been out there, and like there probably won't be proof of ownership over a lot of that stuff, right? Because it's been technically with any plant varietal patent, once it's been introduced into the market for 1 year, you can't put a patent on anything. So all of those cultivars that have been out there are so open source and so wide out there, it's really hard for someone to take proof of ownership. But the important part is identifying what sour diesel is and coming to consensus on what sour diesel is, rather than 5 different people trying to say this is sour diesel, no, this is sour diesel, no. It's like we all have to come to like, nope, this is sour diesel, and all these experts agreed on it because of X, Y, and Z.